Place here. Hello, everyone. Thanks for attending this, and thank you to Eric for participating. This is pretty exciting. We've done a lot of work on this map, and I am excited for us to share it with you. So as mentioned, this is Mapping the Revolution. What's new with this parking reform map? So I'm going to provide a little bit of background and then hand it over to Eric, who's going to do the technical side of things and some demos. If you are familiar, there was this thing called the Strong Towns map. When I founded PRN, and even before I founded PRN, Strong Towns in 2015 launched a Google-based map that was a map of progress on removing parking minimums. And it was great. It was a great idea. It really shine some light and focus on the issue. The problem with this map was that it was not really well vetted. It wasn't formatted. I kind of had a very love-hate relationship with this product because people would refer to it and I knew that it was inaccurate or it wasn't being kept up to date. And so one of my kind of secret goals when I started PRN in 2019 was to eventually, update or try and take control or get this map into like a better state. When we took over this map at the end of 2020, I mean during 2021, by the time we handed over responsibility, it had 171 records. It tracked places that had gotten rid of mandates in some part of their city, had made progress on it, which usually meant reducing mandates, and then the orange ones were like places that were thinking about doing some parking mandates. Um, the data was not, as you can see, I had submitted a report on Portland. They were just kind of like whatever someone sent in was what they just threw up on the map. And like I said, it was fine, but it was not useful as a research product, and it wasn't really in our control. So we decided, partly based on the advice of one of our advisory board members, Patrick Sigmund, to replace this map. And we engaged with Strong Towns and asked if they would like to hand it over to us, which they were happy to do so. Just as an aside, it was Daniel Harrigus, our policy director, who was in charge of the map at that time when he worked for Strong Towns. And so he engaged with us and gave us the data set. And we put together a project to migrate it and turn it into the parking mandates map that we have now. Our first fundraiser we held in October of 2021 as an organization was partly based on raising money to produce a new version of this map. So we successfully raised several $1,000s, and I engaged with some interns. Jane Wilberding, one of our board members, and I kind of got together with some interns from University of Illinois at Chicago and had them review the 170 records that were in the data set to kind of bring them up to state. And we used, Eric will talk about this a little bit, it's not too important, but we used a back-end database called Google Tables, and it took a while to get through. And then we had a volunteer named Brad Baker, who is here in Portland, who built us a version of this map that was based on a product called Shiny. It was written in R if you're at all technical, so this was an easy platform for just creating maps. And we had different ideas. Actually, I had a screenshot in here I was going to show. We initially were going to have different icons showing different land uses and different colors, and we had a lot of busyness. And as we did the run up to releasing the map in 2021, we did simplify it to a degree where we had different colors. This is the old version of the map where there was a toggle for whether they had no parking mandates or not. There were a ton of menus. There were different colors for different land uses, and it was useful, but it was kind of confusing. Just to say how this is generally used in my experience, it's used for three main topics. It's used for advocacy by both planners and advocates, and the purpose of this is to look at all the places that have gotten rid of parking mandates, and since they're all over the map, you can find some that are similar to your city. We have sorting based on population and other factors. You can find comparables. So it's used for advocacy. It's used for research. We've had multiple researchers take our data set and look at features of cities that have no parking mandates. We provide this data, as Eric will point out. It's under an MIT open source license, and it's also used for documentation. This is definitely used to show the progress of the movement, which I think has been its most powerful factor. Being able to say, we can add new. There are people who are motivated by wanting to get a red dot for their city on the map. Activists that want this, and so it's really helps to chart the expansion of parking mandates and wait and provide visuals for that. So we went and built what we now call the parking reform map. This is thanks in part to Donald Shoup and Pew Research, who both provided funds for this for different reasons. Professor Shoup actually was often confused by that initial version of the map. He didn't like that it was so busy, so he had requested at one point and gave us a donation in order to simplify it so that the initial screen was just the cities that had got rid of parking mandates. And Pew Research came through with a grant to help us separate the report types, extend our back end, and allow for new types of reports like parking benefit districts. And just to say, this has been super successful. As I mentioned that first slide, we started with 171 reports. We now have, thanks largely to Samuel Dietz, our super volunteer, we have more than 4,700 records of reforms on here, not just in the United States. Sam is literally going through and systematically looking at whole states and adding them to the map. So, this isn't 4,700 places that got rid of all their mandates, but it is really turning into a world-class research product for zoning, I think. So that's kind of the background. And now I'm going to hand it over to Eric Arellano, our former vice chair and super volunteer, to show you how it was done. So I'm going to stop my sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so I am gonna walk through some of the new features in the map, and I want to start with showing the list, and then we're going to go through each of these new functionalities that we've added. And the first thing that I want to talk about with this project was that we were trying to fix the data modeling, that we gained a lot of information about how cities do parking reform as we went along. When we started, there weren't as many different types of reform. And we had this idea that each city only will have one parking reform. This is an example here, the city Charlottesville, that they have this one reform that they passed in 2023. And we have all this metadata about it of what scope does it impact, for example, in land uses. But we realized as we went along with the project that cities and places often have more than one type of reform. They might, for example, get rid of parking minimums in downtown, but the rest of the city, they only do reductions of minimums. And there are a lot of different real world cases, such as New York City, if you heard about their city or their year of yes, or City of Yes initiative, where we couldn't accurately model with our old map the nuances of having multiple different types of reform. And now we can do that in this map. That we, for example, in this New York one, we have this entry for their parking minimum removals and all the metadata about how that particular reform works. And then New York also has this parking maximum policy, and it has its own separate metadata. Like the scope and the land use here is different than what we have for the parking minimum removal. Trying to model that required reworking how all of our database is set up and how you interact with the map. And it gets even trickier than that, that we realized sometimes you also even have multiple of the same types of reforms. That Adams County, for example, actually has two different distinct parking minimum removals, that they are both entirely removing mandates, but they apply to different scopes. So that was the first big change that we made, is that a place can have more than one reform. Sometimes they're different types of reforms. Sometimes it's multiple distinct policy records for that same reform type. And then we followed up with that with another big improvement to properly support multiple data sets. When you go to this map, one of the key things that you'll want to use is this filter in this top right. And the first thing you'll see here is what data set do you want to look at? By default, it'll show you any parking reforms. But we have these four different types of policy reforms that we're now looking at, including parking benefit districts that we only added a couple months ago. You can narrow in on those different ones. And then you also need to, with the data set, choose what status of the reforms, whether you want to look at things that have actually been adopted, or they're only proposed, or things that have been repealed. And when you change this, it will pull up an entirely distinct data set. And then if you want kind of an aggregate view, you can use this any parking reform to see places that have done multiple of these potential reforms. So fixing our data modeling was the biggest part of this grant and this project. But we also added a couple of new features to the map to make it more useful. One of them is improving our filters that we added a couple of new ones that you might find useful. First is to sort by country. I think going to the this overall view that most of our data set, if we look at this map, is in the United States. But you can see we also have a lot of entries throughout the rest of the world. And you can now use this countries filter that if you want to drill into Brazil, for example, or into a certain region of the world. We also added jurisdictions and we fixed our modeling for how countries can pass reforms in counties and states before most of our entries were about individual cities. Of course, every government and every country models these things a little bit differently, like counties. They might call them different things like provinces. So we tried our best to make it an apples for apples comparison that in Canada it's a province, whereas in the US it's a county. But the toggle or the checkbox behaves the same in general between all of these different countries. And then we also added the year of the reform that you can, for example, look at everything that was passed in 2020. And this adoption year, it's not 100% comprehensive. A lot of the reforms are missing the date for when the reform happened. We either didn't add it at the time or we don't know, and there's no way to figure out when the reform happened. But for especially our most important reforms, like getting rid of parking mandates entirely, we've gone in and tried to backfill all of that data. So that's this filter functionality, which you'll definitely want to use quite a bit. Another big thing that we added is this table view, that in this top left of the app, you can switch between the map view and this table view. And they'll show you the same data, just in a different format. And this table view will show you when there are places that have multiple of the same types of reform, each one of these reforms will get its own entry. You can also, with this table view, you can do things like sort based off of population. And there's this new download as CSV button. This download button will pull the current data set that you have. So if you did a bunch of filters, for example, like you only wanted to look at Australia, and you press this download button, it will respect those filters that you've set up. Another big feature that we added is a share link functionality. That's this icon on this top right. And this copy link button will also honor whatever filters that you've currently set up. So you can, for example, I just did that copy link, and you'll see in this URL that it has all these different things that it's setting, like the country code. It's a little cryptic. It's not really meant for a human to read it, but you can use this copy link and then go to the site, and it will, once it loads, oh yeah, it's here in Australia, it will already have saved that filter that you had set up in advance. So this is really helpful if you ever want to post on social media, for example, or you're doing advocacy, you can have this pre-saved view for the data that you want to highlight. And then two more things I want to give a shout out to. First is this big revamp of the details page. If you had looked at them before, they were a lot harder to read, and we had a design intern named Gibson who helped figure out how can we make these details pages more useful. These details pages are, you can either access them by in the table view, pressing this link, or when you're in the map view and you go to a dot, you can click on it and then go to this details and citations. And these details pages give you way more information about all of these particular reforms. And in particular, they include for all of the reforms citations. We usually will link out to the original source, such as the zoning code. We'll often have an attachment of PDF of the original change or news articles. and then we'll often include screenshots as well. And we tried to make this design very usable that these citations, for example, are all expandable so that when you have a page like New York that has 5 citations here, it's not overwhelming and you only expand citations when you want to look more at it. All right, then the final feature that I wanted to highlight is that we redesigned these details pages and the map itself to be mobile friendly so that it works well when you're on your phone or if you're, for example, using a laptop and you have it like a small laptop on split screen, that the site will still look nice. So this is, for example, what it looks like on an iPhone. And then same with this page that we made it before, it didn't really work when you were on a phone. The UI overlapped and it was really confusing. Cool. So I'll flip back to what these new features are. Give you a second just to recap what we were on. And then this next slide is that I want to give a tip for power users, but this is for any researchers in the crowd that if you are using our data set, most researchers, I think, are probably using CSVs and loading it with Excel or whatnot to look into our data set. And that can work, it's fine. But there is a much better tool and approach to using our data set, which is using this data format called JSON. JSON is a way to represent our data, and it's how we store all of our data under the hood. And there's this tool called JQ that you can use to interact and write really nice queries with the JSON data and look up things like if you want to find all places that have removed parking minimums and the land use is commercial and industrial. You can write that really easily with JQ. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but LLMs like ChatGPT are really good at knowing how to write JQ queries. So even if you have no idea how programming works, you can use this tool to help you to interact with our data more. Awesome. So I'm going to talk also briefly about how did we actually do this migration, and then Tony's going to wrap up with what are some things that we have envisioned for what's next. I want to start with some shout outs. Tony already mentioned our super volunteer, Sam. Sam I think something like 80% of our data set comes from reports that Sam have done. And Sam was huge in making this big data migration that he went through 800 different records that we had and figured out how to fix what needed changes and fixed all of our data modeling. Tung was one of our PRN interns that she did a lot of the software engineering early on in the project and laid a lot of the core foundation for how we do this all. And then Gibson was our design intern who I mentioned earlier. So we split up the project into 4 different phases, and this was around 2 years from start to finish for all of this. But the first step was that we needed to rewrite the app, the original one that Tony had shown you in 2021. We were using this tool called Shiny and the programming language called R. And we started by just rewriting things to JavaScript and making the app a little more usable to do. But we didn't yet improve our data modeling. And then once we had this new app set up, that's when we tackled our database. We are using this tool called Google Tables, which had a lot of different issues with it. And we instead switched to a proper database that allowed us to make all of these future improvements. And once we had this new database in place, which I'll show you in a moment what our database looks like, then we were able to work on fixing our modeling for multiple reforms per place. That originally, again, each place could only have one type of reform, and now they can have multiple. We had some scripts to do this, but 800 of the records needed to be manually cleaned up by a human to figure out how to deduplicate records and everything. And while we were doing this, most people didn't know this, that we had 2 versions of the app running at the same time, that you all were using the old version of the map and the old data set. And behind the scenes, we are developing this new version. And then once everything was ready, we flipped a switch and went to the new model. And the final stage was adding parking benefit districts and adding new features like this table view. A little bit of behind the scenes for how we store all this data. We use this really cool product called Directus, which is an online database that makes it really easy for our volunteers to add new entries and modify our data without needing to know any programming. That they have a really nice form like this, kind of like a Google form, where they can set everything up, and then we pull in all of that data and show the data to you all in the final map. All of this code is also open source, meaning that it is free. Anyone can look at this code and use this code and modify it as long as you follow our MIT license. So if you're curious how any of this works, or you want to add any new feature request or add any functionality, we always welcome people to give contributions. And GitHub is, if you haven't heard of it before, GitHub is a website that software engineers use for sharing code and collaborating on projects. It's kind of like Google Docs or Google Drive, but for programmers. All right, awesome. So that's everything I want to talk about. I'm going to hand it back to Tony to talk about what's next.
Hello, thanks, Eric, for all that presentation of the work. It's really cool. And I just want to thank all the volunteers that have worked on this. Of course, Sam, Eric, there's other folks that helped on version one. We had quite a team of interns that have touched this throughout the years. So, if we didn't mention your name, it's not forgotten that you helped get the map at some point to where it is today. So it's been really fantastic. And Etienne, I think, is going to go find that GitHub link because we had a great suggestion in the chat already for a feature. And the best way to see that happen is it's not too hard to create a GitHub account and you can file a bug or a feature request in there. And that would be the way it is. Even Eric, if I ask Eric, I want something done, Eric tells me, go file a bug request in the GitHub. That's how we track it. So what's next? There's some new features we need. One big feature I really would like to have is kind of this concept of tiering. If you know the map right now, you go there, there's 113 cities that have gotten rid of their parking mandates, but there are a lot of cities that have come very close or have very notable reforms. New York, the city of yes, Atlanta, Nashville, the entire old city, what used to be the city limits of Nashville has no parking mandates, but it's a combined city county jurisdiction. And so because the city technically hasn't got rid of mandates, they don't get a red dot. I'm not saying we want to give them red dots, but we do want to create a tiering system where we can basically rate some cities and some reforms as notable enough that we would like them to show as orange dots on the main view of the screen and just be able for people to track those. And so that's something that we've worked out. We've talked about some of how this would work, but it's needs to be the feature set needs to be kind of defined, and then that work would need to be done. We have statewide. We already have statewide reforms, which are we can record those, but North Carolina, for example, may eliminate parking mandates for every city in the entire state coming up in, April or May. It could happen this year. We have other states that are looking at this reform, and how to deal with that in a visual way is a struggle. Like I've talked to Eric about, hey, maybe we could put a color around the entire state border or something, but it how we deal with that is something that we're going to have to figure out of do we add every city in the state to the map as a dot, or do we, how else do we convey the enormity of a reform like, even what's happened in Connecticut where they got rid of parking requirements for residential. But I think really where this will come to a head is when a state gets rid of all their parking mandates. Um, and then we are working on, Eric showed, and if you go to the map now, you can see these parking benefit district reports, but we haven't quite figured out what the fields are and how to express a parking benefit district. And even we would like to track other reforms like performance-based pricing, interesting residential permits, and cash out. And all of that requires some thoughtful data modeling and will require updates to the data model and the visualization to make work. I think Eric has set things in a very good spot where it's possible, but that will require work to continue to extend this. And I want to shout out, we have a volunteer right now working on trying to figure out how we track those PBD reports so we can start adding more parking benefit districts and tracking that. So we do have help wanted. Eric has done a lot, but I think is trying to kind of not be fully responsible for this data product. There's also bugs that show up occasionally that we do need help with. So the project is on GitHub. If you are a developer, get in touch with us on the Slack, or you can submit pull requests on GitHub or submit features. This is something that we will keep working on. We sometimes have funding for as well to update, and we want to just keep making this map product better and better and better. So that's kind of where I am at.
Tony, if you're not a developer, but you're interested in contributing to the data, we also would be interested in that, right?
Right. I would like at least Sam is doing such a fantastic job. But I would like Sam to have, I think Sam deserves a co-conspirator in this project. And so yeah, if it's if you're interested in doing that, we can handle one or two data volunteers as well, for sure. Yeah. So that's and you don't have to commit for a long time, but you do need to commit long enough to get used to how to use the system, and then be willing to work with Sam to enter new reports or whatever he needs help with. So he's kind of in charge of that project. So yeah, so that's it for now. I think that Etienne hopefully posted that link, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we can get to if there is any Q&A or other questions about the data set. One thing I wanted to point out was that we had a slides that you can make content with the map as it is now with all those filters that Eric showed. Like you can go in and set all the reforms as they were, select all the years up to 2020, for example. I do this for my slideshows all the time. I'll select all the years up to 2020. It will show 18 or so dots on the map for getting rid of parking mandates. Take a screenshot of that and then add the years after that, and you can take a screenshot of that. Or I would be very interested to see people taking this content and producing animations, like showing a progression of how the reforms have happened over a certain number of years. So I just want to say we're open with the data, and we're very open to people doing visualizations or using the data in other fashions. So that's the presentation here.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Does anyone has a question? I want to give quickly a special shout out to Joe Weisner. I hope I'm pronouncing it good, but who made a contribution to this specific event. So yay, thank you, Joe. And I also saw a question here from David that says, where is the JQ inserted? Would love, I don't know if you already answered that. Where is the GQ
No, we
inserted?
haven't.
Would love to research for residential parking minimum removal specifically.
Yeah, good question, David. So JQ is a separate tool that you can use on your local computer. And you would basically download our data set. This is in the JSON format rather than the CSV format. And then you would run this tool, JQ, on top of our data set. And you need to have a query that usually like ChatGPT will help you to write out what the query is for how do you get this exact question you want of searching for the parking minimum removals. Um, and once you have that, you basically tell JQ, this is my query, here's the file, and then it will return back a result for you.
I also want to add that that is, we were tracking a lot more granular land use kind of data initially. We were trying to track a lot of things, and then we pared back some of what we were tracking because it wasn't always completely consistent. But you can go into the map now, and Eric, I don't know if you want to bring up and show, we do have affected land uses. If you're selecting just eliminate or reduce parking requirements, you can go into the affected land uses table and select residential, either all uses, low density, or multifamily. And so you might want to also get rid of your country filter if you've got it.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
so.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
then
yeah, so we have this affected land use, and how these checkbox works is it means you have at least one of these things. So right now, when we have just commercial selected, that means that all of these places at least have a commercial affected land use. They might have other things as well. And then if I add medical, for example, that means that you either have commercial or you have medical, or you might have both of them. You might have additional things as well, but you at least have one of those two.
And I would say this is probably, and Sam, if you want to mention in the chat, or you're welcome to chime in, although I know you prefer not to. Like, I think that for commercial and residential uses, this is probably fairly comprehensive, or at least in the United States. But I can't. This is one of those ones where it's like it's harder to actually track it all. So I don't know if it's research worthy, but it certainly could be a starting point for a discussion. And Sam, if you want to want to speak at all in the chat to the veracity to like how comprehensive it is, please do. But I think I think it's so like medical. There's probably not many I think that we have in there. But oh,
225 places with medical.
so there's I guess maybe it is more comprehensive than I thought. So yeah, that's
This is just for parking maximums, actually. The other thing I'll add again with JQ is I know that those are a lot of foreign concepts and words. So again, if you didn't understand it, feel free to reach out. I'm thinking it might be helpful for us to have additional resources, like a little guide for people how to use JQ. The point of today's thing was just trying to explain it is a much better way to work with our data set than CSV files.
Thanks. Brian, great. So Brian asked, curious to hear more about the plans to track the parking management reforms. Do we have a working edition of a PBD? Great question. So I think so. We're working on a working definition of PBD. I mean, you can kind of go one. I was actually chatting with Adam Miller Ball, who's a professor at UCLA about this, and there was some, like you could say if there's a place where parking revenue is going to anything except building parking garages, maybe that's it. It's probably too broad, but so we're working on that right now. We have an analyst volunteer kind of trying to come up with what the definition is. I don't know if we would track the specific cost of street parking because really then that's maybe more of a Parkopedia type thing or a commercial data set. But I think I would be interested in tracking things like, are you using um, is there a policy for using any sort of demand or data-driven price setting? Another factor I think is really important that we'll want to track is the setting of rates political or is it administrative, right? That's, I think, the key to effective on-street management is if the politicians have to vote on a rate increase, you're almost certainly not going to have a true demand-based pricing. So I think tracking some of those pieces, but it's harder. And I think it takes a village. Like I would love to work with interested folks on trying to suss out this information. I have my own ideas, but also I think, this is an area for further research and help is to kind of narrow it down. It's part of why we don't track these reforms yet. The mandates are easier, but this other stuff is more vague. And Sam mentions that for the most part, the United States is done. There are some coastal states that are large that need to be gone through comprehensively, but I mean, it's really um, quite a monumental work. I can't thank Sam enough.
Okay, Thomas has a question. How did you imagine this assisting with advocacy?
So the map, I assume you're talking about just the existing parking reforms map. It is a couple ways. One, it's certainly just having the dots on the map gave people a target. They knew where they were, and we could watch the movement grow. And that is really psychologically, I think, powerful for people to see that number go up, right? And so it also is helpful for people to show every city is special, right, in their own mind. And so to be able to show that so many places in different jurisdictions, in different corners of the country, different populations, different background politics, um, this helps. It helps planners, it helps advocates to be able to show that this is a wide spread movement. So I think those visualizations are really helpful. And I'll also add it's helpful to advocacy in that this map helps makes the case for funders to support our work, which helps trickle down and support other work. Like this is how we chart one of the main ways we can chart that the work that we're doing as a community is moving forward is by tracking and adding these dots to the map. It shows, even though we're not specifically involved in most of these, we are involved in some of them. if you look at one of these cities that's done this, particularly after 2022, 23, they probably have used this map in their materials to convince city council to get rid of parking mandates. And so helps a lot.
Yeah, one alternative way of saying that is with the map, we want you to go to it and see, whoa, that is a lot of dots. We're not crazy for doing this. A ton of people have already done this.
Right. It also, one thing I'll add too is a really interesting thing I learned from this early on when Sam started really going at the comprehensive review state by state. One thing we learned that I don't think people realized was that, I mean, many, like, it's probably not a majority, but there is a significant fraction of cities in the United States that already don't have parking mandates and have not had them maybe forever. I mean, it's almost a little bit disingenuous to say that all those cities did reforms because in many cases their zoning code never had parking mandates in the downtown. And that was something I don't think we knew, and I don't think many researchers knew. And it's a powerful thing to point out because people think that the downtown is the one area where people I think the parking mandates are most necessary. And you can point out, no, actually, like we already don't have them in much of the country in these places. And so there were some novel things that came out of this, and we're super interested to work with other people who want to use this for studies. Use our data, just cite us is all we really ask. And also let us know because we want to promote it and chime in. Let's see. Brian said every city he works with wants to know what 3 to 5 comparable cities are doing. And yeah, exactly. The map works for that. Thomas?
I forgot to highlight on that note that we do have this population filter as well, where you can look at what range you want. If New York City is not going to be persuasive, then change this population to focus on your target size. And this will update the map and update the table view and everything. And it combines with all of these other filters as well.
Thomas?
So thank you for that explanation. Just to go a little bit further. So in Denver, we were pushed by the state drafting a set of regulations. The city decided to go a half step further and just eliminate it citywide. But in the process, it was difficult to ascertain who was involved, where we were pushing, who was kind of leading it or directing it outside of the city, and who was leading it inside the city. Right now, since we did pass eliminations across the entire city for all uses, now we're looking at, okay, what's our next steps? And then how do people get involved and understand, okay, what did we do? How did we get there? And now what methods work for us to get the next ones? We have a parking benefit district trial that we're trying to push through. So it's like, okay, trying to pull all that together. I know this is just a map, but if that's what PRN is trying to get to, what associated tools do we need that complement the map is really an exciting place that I think we will start to get to now that we have a great mapping tool.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm gonna pass this over to Powell after just commenting on that. But I mean, that's what the network and PRN is hopefully for as well, and helps you with. I mean, these events are activities, and we plan this year actually to be in a position to really engage more with local places and help them to think about those next steps or help them organize. We've got some exciting kind of programs. Some of them are on the website already. We have a local action program. In the case of y'all in Denver, I would say, are organizing roundtables or working with like the folks in Austin who have a parking reform coalition that is also similar to you, continuing beyond getting rid of the mandates and looking at additional reforms to strengthen and move forward in more of the Shoup doctrine. So yeah, that's what we're here for. And thanks for the comments. And I'm glad you were able to use it. I'm going to hand it back to Paula to wrap this up because we're at time and we want to respect that. But you know where to find us. So if you're interested in working on this, get in touch.